along. We can make the world your friend. Silver ball in the air, see it glow everywhere. Nickelodeon, Nickelodeon, here we go,
Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and we're in week 3 of our month dedicated to the celebration of Nickelodeon's 40th anniversary with the debut of Pinwheel. Last week we had Andrew and Joy from the Big Orange Couch podcast. If you're interested in checking that out, click on the link on the description box below or on top. With me I have a very special guest. He does analysis videos, he does top 10s, he does reviews. I have with me Saberspark. So welcome, Saberspark.
Thank you for having me.
So yeah, I'd love to know from you personally. So what were your earliest memories with Nickelodeon?
Rugrats, absolutely Rugrats. I recall, like, cause I was lucky where I grew up, like, right when Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network started to really, like, do their thing with their own original programming. And I recall watching Rugrats and Doug with my sisters growing up. And I was a huge fan of those cartoons. I mean, especially Rugrats. I was a huge fan of that show. I was obsessed, and I enjoyed it. And I just, from that point on, I loved Nickelodeon and stuck with it all the way up until high school, where things started to change. But we'll get to that later, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. So, what was it about Rugrats that captivated you?
I think the animation, for some reason, really caught my eye, despite me not really knowing what the difference between things like Scooby-Doo and old Hanna-Barbera versus the new animation coming from Nickelodeon. I the characters were more interesting. I liked the adventures. I enjoyed the humor. And the funny thing being, of course, and a lot of folks say this, is that it's one of those shows you can enjoy twice, where you can watch as a child and enjoy the baby humor, and then watch it as an adult and enjoy the humor from the parents and those jokes that went over your head. So it's a show that it's aged quite nicely, too.
Yeah, definitely. I think that when you look back on something like Rugrats, I mean, the concept is just a bunch of talking babies, but when you get into the deep core of it, you see the imaginations and adventures from the babies, but then you see from the perspective of the parents, who are just, they're new parents, and they're trying to do the best for their kid, and they do, so they don't exactly do the best job a lot of the time, but you do see that they do have their own personal struggles, but at the same time, they have their triumphs as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And even in the Rugrats movie, I feel like they kind of started to not be as sort of what I'm looking for, as the show progressed and got into the later phases where, like, the animation changed. I don't think the adult humor was quite there as it used to be.
Makes a lot of sense, because when Rugrats finished their original run, a lot of the original writers went off to work on stuff such as Hey Arnold and Recess and a lot of the slice of life cartoons from the late 90s. And a lot of new writers came in. Paul Germain, who was the original showrunner, left to do Recess with Joe and Solibahair. And Arlene Klasky pretty much, for the most part, took over, and she wanted to do it what she, quote-unquote, originally intended. Because although she was the one who created the idea of Rugrats, basically being like a child version of the 80s show's 30-somethings, it was essentially Paul who pretty much was like the main showrunner. He was the one who supervised the voice actors, the writers, the animators, making sure everything was well. And I've gotten flack when I said this, but I felt like even with like even before the introductions of the new characters like Baby Dill and Kimmy and all the other pointless characters that nobody talks about, like Taffy, I felt like even then, even when the show came back around 96 or 97, I felt like it wasn't the same anymore. And it wasn't just the different style of animation. It wasn't just the fact that the babies acted a little bit more dumber and they said words that they originally would have said normally otherwise. And it wasn't the fact that the stories weren't as compelling. I just knew that something was missing until I realized a lot later that they changed management. And not to be fair, there are some things from the later seasons that I do like. I love the Mother's Day special. I love the Hanukkah special. I do enjoy Rugrats in Paris. So there are things about it that I do like.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. You nailed it. You absolutely put it into words. The way I felt about this stuff, and I didn't realize that the management change. That's interesting. It's always incredible how you take one person out of the puzzle, or like a couple people out of the puzzle, and you can just tell like how things just shift so drastically. Where like the same thing with SpongeBob when Steven left to do his own thing for a while before he returned to the show. It was like, wow, these new writers, they don't really get it like the old ones do.
Yeah, and it's it's funny that you mentioned that. Not only was Steven kind of burned out from SpongeBob because he felt like he did all that he could. I remember that I was in a panel with Roger Bumpus, the voice of Squidward, a few years ago at Florida SuperCon, and I think another reason why he left was that his wife was sick with cancer at the time, and so he needed to take care of her and his family. Like his kids and stuff like that until I think that's what Roger said. I do remember him saying that story. I don't think it was like around the time that, the fourth season was about to start. I think it was like a little bit later on. So I think I remember that when Steven came back, that was when his wife's cancer had remissioned and she was feeling better. And I think that around that time when he got a break from SpongeBob was what he decided that was one of the reasons why he decided to come back.
Well, that's incredible that his wife had cancer. I mean, I'm glad it went into remission, but like I'm not sure if we know this, and I'm sure this information's accurate, but I think Steven has ALS at the moment.
Yes, that's really sad. I heard about that news a while ago.
Yeah, it blows. Like, dude, like you get hit with one fist, and then the other one comes swinging after you. So, I guess hope that he can put up with it and that they can find some new cures for that. But I guess aside the point for now, I mean, credit where credit is due. SpongeBob is one of the greatest cartoons ever made, in my opinion. Though that's kind of later on, I guess, as far as Nickelodeon cartoon progression goes.
Yeah, that's fine. I do respect SpongeBob. I was almost 13 when the show came out, so I was kind of a little bit out of Nickelodeon. I went more over into Adult Swim and Toonami. But I do remember, like, my younger cousins, and when I was around in high school, that was when, the fandom started to grow, and I was like, that's actually really interesting. And, I took a peek every once in a while of it, and then I started doing the Nickelodeon tribute, and then I watched more of it, and I was like, okay, now I understand why a lot of people love SpongeBob. It's essentially like if you took the foundation of Ren and Stimpy and Rocko's Modern Life, mixed it up with the songs that would be featuring in all of those shows, and if you put it together, then you essentially have SpongeBob. It's like the best of both worlds, or it's basically like a best of edition with the previous Nicktoons that came out, but fully realized.
I agree. I think also an element of the show that they really captured, and it gives me a lot of respect for like the old Looney Tunes shows, is it's just basic slapstick comedy. Where like the way Elmer Fudd or Daffy would go back with Bugs Bunny, that stuff. It's so similar to what SpongeBob and Patrick do with Squidward. And it's comedy 101. It's just get a grumpy antagonist and just mess with them, and SpongeBob just excels in that. That's some of the and also my buddy made this point. It's one of the most quotable shows of all time. I really believe that. Like, you can say a SpongeBob quote, and if you're saying it around some kids who grew up with Nickelodeon, they're going to most likely know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Here's a funny story. I think I may have mentioned this a few times before, but when I was living in Idaho, there was this kid that I met up with, that I was acquainted with, and he told me this really hilarious story about how he and his brother were doing a fundraiser selling candy bars or something. And you have to understand that this is a small town in Idaho. Nobody really watches TV or go on the internet, they're outdoorsy people. They ride their bikes. They there's a mountain nearby that they can go mountain climbing or hiking. There's a lake that was like a few miles away, so they can go swim. There's a lot of outdoorsy things to do. So basically, not a lot of people in that town watch TV. So he wrapped his brother in bandages, and he went door to door to every single one of them, and he said, excuse me, sir, we're selling these candy bars. You see, my brother was born with glass bones and paper skin. Every day he breaks his legs. Every night he breaks his arms. And at night he lays in agony while his heart attacks put him to sleep. And and he said every person fell for it.
That's hilarious, because there's no way that if those people are completely out of touch with like cartoons, then they're not going to know it's from a show.
No, nobody knew it was from a show.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
Until the one Idahoan or whatever who has watched the show is screaming in the roads, "Chocolate!" and chasing the kids around or something.
I don't think they ever experienced that, but yeah, that they did a pretty decent job according to what he said, and that was pretty hilarious.
That's fantastic.
It's actually, you're absolutely right. I remember my friends Casey and Ashley from the Friday Night Nicktoons podcast, when they were starting out, the very second episode was a contest to see who can quote the most SpongeBob lines.
That's a good contest. I like that.
Yeah, so basically, like, they would say each other a line, and whoever couldn't say it at like 10 seconds, they lose, or something like that. But yeah, it's actually a really interesting point. Like, a lot of these Nicktoons, when you think back on it, you know, they have like quotable lines. If you think of Ren and Stimpy, you think of things like "you stupid idiot" or "happy happy joy joy." With Rugrats, it's "a baby's gotta do what a baby's gotta do," or "you dumb babies." Doug would be like "dear journal" or something like that. But yeah, I do think that with all of those things combined with the relatability that a lot of these Nicktoons presented, I think that's partially why that a lot of kids still remember it.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. There's certain calling cards of different shows, like, you know, with Doug, with Skeeter. Yeah. I mean, I think most people know that, at least from our age group or from our generation of cartoon lovers. And Nickelodeon, like, I gotta give them some major props for, like, it's. I talked to my buddy about why, like, shows and channels and Nickelodeon Cartoon Network did so well at that time, and he said it was more of a change in television and how TV was going, okay, so we're going to make quality content that we'll want to keep advertisers around, and we're just going to be superior compared to, like, not trying to have a go at those 1980 cartoons, but like cheap versions of G.I. Joe or those knockoffs where it's just strictly there to sell toys and candy and whatnot. I mean, it's a mess. I'm probably just hitting on another topic here. It's a little bit too big for right now, but I appreciate that Nickelodeon had the sense to go, okay, we're going to make some good cartoons. We're going to make some stuff that's going to take some skill and some time, but it's going to pay off.
Yeah, that pretty much was the reason why they did it in the first place. Even when Nickelodeon was starting, like, around the late 70s, their main goal was to be educational. They wanted quality program for children, as opposed to, like, all the stuff that was going on in TV at the time that they felt was garbage for kids, especially when the 80s came along with, with all those cartoons like He-Man or Thundercats or your My Little Pony and Gem and the such. Sure, a lot of those cartoons they have charm in their own right, but essentially, if you do look at the surface on what it is, they're essentially 30-minute toy commercials.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Which even the government and parents started to call the battle on that, saying, like, this is just a glorified commercial to sell toys. And I read that, like, companies realized that it was cheaper to do a TV show, like for My Little Pony. Like, it's cheaper just to do a TV show than to do these commercials. And we can also advertise during the TV show. So, I'm with you on that. With Nickelodeon going like, hey, we're going to do something different. We're going to make some good shows that will keep people around for the long haul.
Yeah, and even with the live action shows, discussing about how they were relatable for a lot of kids. Like,
Oh, yeah.
Clarissa Explains It All really connected with teenage girls and even boys who liked it. Pete and Pete was that surreal, atmospheric, and quirky humor that basically was like every Wes Anderson movie afterwards. And all that was the SNL for kids, or the You Can't Do That on Television for the new generation.
Yeah.
And a lot of those shows really connected towards a lot of kids, saying that I want to be like that character. And also another thing that has been discussed a few times before about the diversity of the cast members, like it's basic. You can be a different nationality, a different skin tone, boy, girl, whatever, and you can still connect with these characters in a very unique way.
I want to double back on the live action stuff because there's always that question of whether things are bad today versus just being blinded by nostalgia, and if the older content was actually any good to begin with, or if you were just kind of in a position where you're like, oh no, season 1 of this show is fantastic versus season 7, which is now garbage. In the same sense of like, all that and the Amanda show were amazing, but shows today are no good. Like it's kind of hard to say because different perspectives from different times. But that being said, like Nickelodeon had a very strong line of live action content, like you said. I loved like Camp on Awana.
Oh, you mean Salute Your Shorts?
Salute Your Shorts. I'm sorry, I was trying to think of another one. Salute Your Shorts. That's the one.
Yeah, Camp on Awana is where they went to.
I still remember that song. No Camp on Awana, we hold you in our heart. It's good. I love how all the kids from that time just truly reflect like the styles and the rebellious attitude of the 90s. Because the 90s had some sass to them.
Yeah, and we can even date all the way back to the 80s, in which you had the likes of MTV being all rebellious as like, stand up against the adults. We're the cool people around. So it was definitely like carrying towards that. And the advertisements were another layer of that with Nick is Kids and adults, you don't need to be around to, no grown-ups allowed, kids rule, and all that kind of stuff. So it basically just showed to the kids that they were the ones that were that they were the ones that were being focused on with the networks. And I guess the shows were a reflection on that. With Salute Your Shorts, you had the group of kids coming together. Ugg was like the mean camp instructor who they were always teasing, and he was always teasing them, and they felt like that he misunderstood them, and so on and so forth. Pete and Pete has this underline of going up against the parents, and the parents are doing all these things for their kids without them knowing. Like there's this one scene in which Pete's dad was talking about how he switched from whole milk to 2%, and there was like this whole conspiracy about like, we're going to be switching whole milk to 2%, and they won't be able to know it, where they have like these phone call meetings. So there's always been that and also with Clarissa talking about how her family is incredibly dorky, like the way that her dad would be calling her sport, and that he would do all these silly puns, and that her mom's trying to make her eat tofu because it's healthy. It's always that underline of, I'm a kid. I don't have to do what my parents tell me.
Yeah.
And I get to do whatever I want because I feel like I know myself. So I guess those shows were a reflection on that.
And it also solidified to the viewers, like, this is your channel. Like, and that's something I think as a kid I understood, even if I didn't really recognize it. It just kind of came across as like, this is, if there's a TV channel for me to go to, I can watch cartoons or just content for me. This is Nickelodeon. This is for me. This is for my kid. For my age, for my fellow kids. Because there are cartoons on like Saturday morning cartoons or other channels, but Nickelodeon was like mostly for me, and I think I really loved that. And I was one of the lucky kids to where I was growing up when channels like this were starting to arrive, where I didn't have to go, okay, Saturday morning cartoons are over, now I have nothing else to do. I was definitely a cartoon, TV kid junkie growing up as a kid in the 90s, so that was right up my alley.
Yeah, and it was for a lot of kids' alleys, absolutely. Now, you covering up Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, around that time when we had the likes of the cartoons and with the Nicktoons, what would you say was like a stark difference between Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon? Because I always see people saying like, in this era, Cartoon Network was the best, in this era, Nickelodeon was the best. So yeah, how would you follow up on that?
Cartoon Network. It's funny, like I've covered these topics and I still have a hard time like putting into words. I think Cartoon Network was a bit wilder, like Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls. Come from Gendy and Craig, and those two are good friends who go back to Cal Arts, and you can definitely tell that they brought their own brand of humor, and it reminds me of I don't know. It felt more Hanna-Barbera-ish, but had much better animation and was a lot more cartoony. I think that's the way I describe it. Is Cartoon Network just felt more cartoony, while Nickelodeon, like Hey Arnold and Rugrats and Doug, was a bit more static, where it's like not as like wacky, like stretchy arms and a pie in the face. I mean, like I know that they do have shows like that, like Cat Dog and SpongeBob. But I think Cartoon Network really they're like, this is a cartoon channel. This is about cartoon characters who can do anything, and they're all crazy and wacky and doing silly stuff. Versus Nickelodeon, where it's like, no, we have shows like we have that, but we also have things like Hey Arnold and As Told by Ginger, where it's like we can slow down and it's not really just a cartoon, animation focused show. We focus on some serious stories here. I love Hey Arnold. I absolutely adore it. And I don't think Hey Arnold would have fit on Cartoon Network. I think it was a much better place to be put on. Nickelodeon was a better home for a show like that, because Nickelodeon also had things where it's like we can slow down and take things seriously for a bit and then go back to doing a lighthearted episode next time. Did it make any sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think because that Ted Turner had purchased all the rights to the Warner Brothers and Hanna-Barbera cartoons at the time, and were able to incorporate Cartoon Network. And because that a lot of these people had worked with Hanna-Barbera previously, they were able to take that same style and were able to branch out with their own original cartoons.
Yes.
And we had, Fred Seibert from Frederator, who created What a Cartoon, and he presented all these pilots to see which one would stick. And we had gotten the original 5 cartoons. We had Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, Dexter's Lab, Courage the Cowardly Dog, and Powerpuff Girls from that. And essentially, they were able to create their own style, but they all had their same amount of silliness and wackiness that you would see in a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, but they would also have the smart and sophistication from Dexter's Lab. They would have the heroics of Powerpuff Girls. They would have the kind of like creepy over the top atmospheric mood from Courage the Cowardly Dog. They would have that somewhat sly wit from Johnny Bravo. I think Ren and Stimpy, not Ren and Stimpy, Cow and Chicken would have fit into something like Nickelodeon, because David Feiss, who created Cow and Chicken, also worked on Ren and Stimpy, and then he went off to do Cow and Chicken. So I could see Cow and Chicken working for Nickelodeon as well, but I guess because Ren and Stimpy was hugely influential and had so many copycats, I guess I could understand that Cartoon Network wanted to have their version of it.
Absolutely. Which, it's interesting how different channels can have different flavors, and it's not like a channel cannot have a certain show because it's different. I think there's more of a common denominator for the two channels. Or Cartoon Network was a bit more of the wacky silliness of it, while Nickelodeon had some pretty sharp writing where it's like we can get serious for a bit. Again, with As Told by Ginger, there's an episode where I believe it's not Carl, but the Ginger's brother.
Yeah, that's Carl.
That is Carl. Okay, Hoodie. That's his friend.
Hoodie.
Hoodie, that's right.
I do a weekly As Told by Ginger podcast, so I should know this stuff.
Good. It was a. There was the episode where the teacher passed away. And
that's called No Hope for Courtney.
See, that one got me. Like, I actually like cried watching that. And then there's been some Hey Arnold episodes where I've got me teary eyed, and it's like I don't think I would see this on Cartoon Network really. I mean, not to say Cartoon Network is absent of serious shows, because Samurai Jack had some serious episodes as well. So I guess I'd say each channel kind of has its own little flavor. Doesn't mean it has to be strictly that flavor, but it has like, okay, these are the shows we're used to. Like, I know that Adventure Time was pitched to Nickelodeon, and they shut it down.
Twice.
Those dorks. And I don't know why they didn't trust Fred's opinion on that one. They made a mistake, but Cartoon Network was able to find a good little spot for them on their network that eventually became one of their flagship shows. So I don't know. It's I guess also times change and things change over time with like the flavors and directions the networks go. But I guess reeling this back into Nickelodeon, I mean, Angry Beavers is very cartoony. That show felt like a Cartoon Network show. My Life as a Teenage Robot feels very much so like a Cartoon Network show, which makes sense because Rob Renzetti created it, and he worked a lot on things like Dexter's Lab and I believe Powerpuff Girls. So there's some, I guess, cross sections here and there, but yeah, Nickelodeon. I felt like that was a good place to go to be like, okay, I'm gonna watch some Hey Arnold. I want to watch a little bit more serious episodes here and there, and Nickelodeon was a better place for that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I cannot imagine an episode of something like I don't know, Dexter's Lab, in which they're talking about suicidal depression. Or yeah. I cannot imagine an episode of, let's say, Hey Arnold, in which, in this episode, Arnold and his friends are going to go on a wacky adventure, and along the way, they go into some slapstick humor. It'll be completely out of place, yeah. Yeah,
it wouldn't feel the same, because Arnold, it has its silly moments, but it's not like there's not going to be a bomb and a pipe blows up in Arnold's face. Like, that's not going to happen. And I'm forgetting another very important show to Nickelodeon, which I think was one of the most definitive shows they've ever had on the network, was Avatar. That I remember my buddy got me into that show in the early 2000s or the mid 2000s, and I didn't watch it live on Nickelodeon. I had to watch it after the fact on DVD. Because I had this phase where, around 2006, and so I started to be like, oh, I don't care about Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network. I'm an adult going to college soon, yeah. But then My Little Pony came out in college, and I went right back to cartoons. But Avatar was such that show's story was fantastic, and it had some super serious moments, and it was some pretty mature content for, you could have some 8-year-olds watching this stuff, but still, that doesn't mean they can't enjoy a cartoon that has some, I don't know, character to it, some true emotions that are you'd find it at a developed show, in developed people. I hope my words are making sense. I feel like I'm just saying stuff at this point and trying to sound fancy, but no, Avatar, that show really tugged at my heartstrings, and that was another big stepping stone for Nickelodeon to go, hey, we can make a show that has an overarching story and also have some pretty advanced animation in it too.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was kind of in a similar boat, in which this must have been when I was in my freshman or sophomore year in college, and I remember that I saw a commercial of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I was like, oh man, another show where it's trying to be like an anime where you have these kids doing the elements. This is like Shaolin Showdown. So I pretty much almost dismissed it, but then my college friends who are a part of a forum, they said, oh man, you gotta watch the first episode, it's so good. And so then I saw that they were going to be rerunning the first 2 episodes and make in preparation for the 3rd episode, and I was like, okay, I'll give it a watch. And so then I watched, and I was back into it. And this was when I was in my anime phase, so I guess because it felt like an anime coming into America. I mean, don't get me wrong, Teen Titans was also an example on this, and there was a lot of anime on TV at the time. So I was able to see Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I immediately fell in love with it. And I saw that the characters were great, and I saw the storyline progressing, and it just really clicked with me and my friends. So yeah, I definitely do. I do agree about that. Here's the thing, like, it's a miracle that Avatar: The Last Airbender even happened, because
Yes.
they were, I know that Nickelodeon was toying around with having their own anime when they were doing Constant Pain, but then unfortunate circumstances happened, and so Constant Pain was canceled, and then I guess with the right time at the right place, Mike DiMartino and Brian Konietzko decided to pitch Avatar, and it went through. So I guess Nickelodeon saw that kids were getting into anime. And so they decided, hey, let's see if we can have our own version. It's like with, if you look at something like Fairly Odd Parents, with like the whole silly, goofy humor, similar to what you would see in a Cartoon Network show from, years prior. It's like, I guess they were trying to experiment to see what would the new generation of kids like. Because, I'm sure you probably understand this, but like around 2000, for me, I was pretty much done with Nickelodeon, because I was already a teenager. The shows that I grew up with were gone, and so I kind of like distanced myself away for a while. But then I started slowly getting back to it when, that one show got to you, and I guess for the both of us, it was Avatar.
Yeah, it's interesting in the sense of like, it's part of the reason why I kind of started to turn my back onto television and animation from Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon was I felt like the mid 2000s didn't really have much to offer, and I'm like, oh, my old shows I grew up with, they're gone, and I don't really see them anymore. And I'm not really a huge fan of things like Johnny Test or the new sitcoms that were coming in from Nickelodeon, because I'm sorry, excuse me, those new sitcoms, I felt like they were really trying to cash in on things like the ditzy live action sitcoms and High School Musical and things like that. And I'm like, I think I'm done for now. And also the internet was kind of showing up and starting to really come into itself, or come into its own, where like I played World of Warcraft and I'd go on to like early on YouTube, and I was more distracted by the internet at the time. But when My Little Pony came out in 2010, that's when I was like, whoa, this is a really good cartoon. And it made me look back on Nickelodeon Cartoon Network and go, well, what are they up to? And unfortunately, at the time, Nickelodeon didn't really have a ton going on. But it allowed me to start rewatching the old shows and also reconnect with the new shows in Cartoon Network, being like Adventure Time regular show, and being like, oh, well, animation's kind of coming back here a bit. So, because right now, like, I guess if we're going to talk about the modern stuff, is it cool if I bring up the modern stuff going on? Of course,
absolutely.
Loud House, man, that was I love that show.
Yeah. Did you see the new episode where they do Legends of the Hidden Temple?
Are you serious?
It's so good. Oh my God, I'm in love.
That's so funny. I actually was typing in Legends of the Hidden Temple into Google, and they have some of the old like shirts, not old shirts, but they have like on Etsy like the silver snakes and the purple parrots and things like that.
Yeah, and Lincoln and his dad are the orange iguanas.
I was always cheering for the monkeys though.
My favorite was the blue barracudas.
Yeah. They sound like soccer teams from when like you're 8 years old or something, where it's like the blue barracudas. But yeah, Loud House was a breath of fresh air, where it's like, oh, you guys have an original property that has some heart and some pretty swell writing to it. And I've read that I think Greg Lyle or Greg Griffin now said on Twitter like a few weeks or a few months ago, or a little while ago, where she was mentioning how Loud House would occasionally surpass SpongeBob in the ratings, which is pretty awesome, because SpongeBob's been the powerhouse show for like well over a decade now. So I don't know, maybe it's shows like Loud House. They're the ones where they make producers go, okay, maybe now's the time for a change, for us to start betting on some new content and some newer shows and not rely on the sponge as much. So we'll see what happens.
And you want to know what a great thing about that show is it's a slice of life show mixed in with some comedy. Now, I like to call slice of life cartoons, or the slice of life genre, I like to call it the 3D platformers of animation, because around the late 90s, they were pretty much everywhere. You had Recess, you had Hey Arnold, you had Pepper Ann, you had
Beginners.
Yeah, that was in 2000, but yeah, like around the late 90s, early 2000s, you had As Told by Ginger, you had The Proud Family, you had Fillmore, you had Lloyd in Space. They were everywhere, and
you're right.
everybody tried to be like the next slice of life cartoon. But as time went on, that was when we had the likes of anime coming in, and everybody wanted to have anime superhero cartoons. Everybody was getting into the fantasy genre. So it changed. And nowadays, we don't even see slice of life cartoons anymore. I mean, with the exception of maybe some anime, the only two slice of life cartoons that I do know of that are being popular on TV are The Loud House and Clarence. That's pretty much it.
And funny that you bring that. I didn't even think about that. But I mean, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise, because trends always beget more trends and more of the same. Which is not to say that shows that follow and step are necessarily bad, because all those shows you mentioned, I watched. Recess was fucking. I'm sorry. Oh,
no, you go ahead. I don't care.
Recess was amazing. I adore Recess, and earlier on you mentioned how some of the writers from Rugrats and went over to that show.
Yes.
And I'm like, wow, that's why it's so good, because Recess, like, in the same way that Rugrats was like, here's the world of babies, Recess, like, it's like, here's the world of being like an elementary school kid, and how there's almost like this culture and it definitely very fictional, but like this realm to it with like the playground with, there's the girl on the swing set, and there's King Bob, and then there's the kindergartners, and I love that. And also, I gotta say, it's a bit specific, but one of my favorite episodes of a cartoon ever, and one of the best lessons they ever taught, was when TJ was trying to get this new kid to like him, and the new kid just wouldn't bite. And at the end of the episode, TJ confronts them, being like, listen, dude, why don't you like me? And he's like, I don't know. I just don't like you. And that was that. And the lesson being that there'll be people in this world who just don't like you, and you can't do anything about it. And I'm like, that's an insanely mature lesson, because no one wants to be told that they won't be liked. They like to always, like My Little Pony I don't think they'd ever do that. Sorry, but that person just doesn't like you, and that's just the way it is. But Recess tackled that, and I think it rings very true. And I think it's an important lesson for kids to know that you'll meet people in this world who are just jerks, and there's nothing you can do about it, and they'll dislike you just because you are who you are. But there's nothing wrong with you being who you are. So sorry, I thought that was a really great lesson.
Oh, no. You would say anything you want. It's perfectly fine. And yeah, I definitely do agree about Recess. It's funny because, everybody's talking about how much they like or they hate All Grown Up. I'm like, hey, guess what? There is a continuation of Rugrats. It's called Recess. It's basically like if you took Rugrats and focus it on different kids, except they're older. It has that same presence to it, and you can see why. A lot of the writers, the original showrunner, the music composer, they all worked from Rugrats into Recess, and you can definitely see that. You have TJ, who's like the determined kid, who's like Tommy. You have Gus, who's kind of like Chucky, being the timid one, and you have Miss Finster, who's like this tough teacher, and Principal Prickly, and it's basically just showing about, once again, that, the kids rule and the adults, they don't understand the kids. And yeah, you have amazing lessons, like when TJ and Spinelli, they want to see if they like each other, so they kiss, or, when TJ goes incredibly crazy with those stickers, and he does this huge conglomerate, when TJ gets put into the box, and it's kind of like a crazy, and he goes incredibly crazy, suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, him thinking that he's in prison. So yeah, I definitely do.
Right, that is a continuation. I didn't think about that, and I gotta say, that show also did a great job of portraying adults, and how, like, even these adults who have these what kids perceive as like grumpy adults, who are like, oh, they hate kids. It's like, no, they're just doing their jobs. And like Miss Finster even had a side about her and the principal where it's like, no, they're still kids at heart in a way. They just, but they are adults, and now they have to have more responsibilities and do their job.
Yeah,
So
yeah. There's there's a
cool.
great episode focusing on Miss Finster when Spinelli has to be with her for about a day or two, and she
Yeah, I remember
about
that
her.
one.
Then there's obviously Recess School's Out, in which TJ and Principal Prickly have to work together, and the Principal Prickly says this wonderful speech about, like, guess what? At one point we were kids too, and we understand what you're going through, and someday you're gonna be an adult too. And yeah, that's actually a really strong lesson in which adults are not always bad. They went through the same things you went through. You just have to give them a chance and get to know them a little bit more.
I completely agree, and you really blew my mind with the Recess. I gotta go back and watch that show now.
Yes, and for all you listeners, if you haven't checked out our Recess podcast with Paul and Joe, then please click on the link in the description box below. Anyway, so yeah, I guess we can start wrapping things up. So.
Totally.
Yeah, I guess for the most part, looking back on what Nickelodeon, the change that Nickelodeon's been going through over the last couple of years has been amazing with, ever since the likes of shows like Harvey Beaks and The Loud House coming in and pretty much shaking up the foundation that, hey, not all cartoons are in Nickelodeon are bad. And of course, we've had Core and TMNT, which are also good too. And also, with the TV movies being announced, with Legends of the Hidden Temple, and the Jungle movie, Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling, and the new Invader Zim TV movie, and possibly some others in the future, who knows. And, people are siding with Nickelodeon now, which, if you would have told me that, 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, I would have never believed you.
I agree.
Who would have thought that, they would go from Back at the Barnyard and Planet Sheen to Harvey Beaks and The Loud House, and everybody would be loving it. Sure, they still have problems with their live action shows. They're still on that Disney Channel formula or Dan Schneider pumping shows every 5 minutes. But, it's stepping stones. That's what I say.
I agree. 100% agree with you. And it's cool that they're giving these people a chance to bring back these older shows. Hey Arnold, I'm so glad we're getting closure. And there's I remember reading a story about this back in college, and I'm not sure if it's 100% true, but basically the Jungle movie was supposed to be the big premiere movie. But Nickelodeon's like, no, we want you to do the Hey Arnold, the movie instead, and then we'll give you the Jungle movie as a sequel.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what happened. They saw the success of Rugrats and the Rugrats movie and Rugrats in Paris because they both made $100 million, and they were like, what's gonna be our next show that we're gonna feature that a lot of kids love, and we want to have it on the big screen to capture the success of Rugrats? Hey Arnold, yeah, you have that TV movie Arnold Saves the Neighborhood. We're gonna make it theatrical now.
It's so goofy because you can tell that wasn't what the creators really wanted, and it just doesn't feel the same. But the Jungle movie, it's kind of poetic, where it's like, sweet, we're gonna get at least a good sign off by Hey Arnold. And then I'm also really excited about Rocko's Modern Life. I read a story about how when they went to the network's like, no, you have to do it for this. You have to do it cheaper. You have to do it with a smaller budget. You have to not be as intense with the animation. And according to my buddy Jim, he told me that the folks in charge of Rocko's Modern Life, they're like, well, if we're not going to get what we want, we're just going to walk by. And Nickelodeon's like, wait, no, never mind. Do what you want. Here's the money. Make it happen.
Yeah.
Which I find fascinating, because I don't think Rocko's Modern Life was as... It's not like it's a Rugrats or a Hey Arnold. I felt like it was a bit more niche. Myself, personally, that's my viewpoint. I might be wrong.
You're perfectly fine. I remember when Rocko's Modern Life came out, and a lot, people liked it, but for a lot of critics at the time, they pretty much dismissed it because they thought of it as a Ren and Stimpy clone. But but now it's one of those shows that have been vindicated because people now look back on it and it's like, oh man, why didn't we appreciate this show much sooner? This show is amazing. And I guess it's a combination of, it throws in a lot more adult innuendos than Ren and Stimpy ever did, in which it flew over people's heads, but it also has an underline of being a parody of what the world was back then, about consumerism and about corporate gains and about how a person trying to live off life and the world all around them is pretty much screwed up. I remember when I first heard the news about Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling coming out, and they saw the trailer, and everybody was and people were complaining, saying like, "Oh man, they're going to be making fun of the millennials." It's like, did you understand the purpose of Rocko's Modern Life? The whole point of Rocko's Modern Life wasn't mostly about, oh, we're gonna make these jokes and you're gonna not know about it until you look back on it and then you're gonna laugh. It's like, no, the whole purpose of it was that it's basically a parody of people going through life and all the strange things that happen. Like, if you were going to the laundromat, what would happen if the laundromat went to life and, the clothes got sucked in and you don't know where they went? What would happen if you were to go to a gym and you were chosen to be there because you seemed fit and the other ones just pretty much were dismissive? And I understand that maybe some people don't understand the underlines, or maybe they just see it for the laughs, and I perfectly understand, but I think that people should at least give it a chance of what it is. And I think for a lot of people now, compared to 25 years ago, I think they understand it a little bit more now.
Yeah. With the times now, they understand the perspective a bit more. But it's cool to see Rocko, Invader Zim, things like that come back. I mean, yeah, they aren't full-fledged series, but I'd rather get a solid conclusion from a movie than a long series that isn't as satisfying. So we'll see what happens. Nickelodeon's making some good choices, and I think right now is the time to cash in on nostalgia and see where it takes them.
Yeah, they better cash on this nostalgia now, because who knows, maybe a few years down the line, people are going to start missing the 2000s. The kids who grew up with the 2000s are going to be in college, and they're going to be reminiscing about, man, I miss Jimmy Neutron. I miss My Life as a Teenage Robot. I miss Chalk Zone. What happened to those shows, man?
Oh, Chalk Zone. I agree with you. I find it funny that they haven't made any moves on Rugrats.
Well, they do have the comic book series, and look where Invader Zim started off with. It started off with the comic book series. It became so popular that they decided, hey, this would be a perfect time to have the movie. So I'm going to call this right now. Either Rugrats or Danny Phantom will have the next TV movie.
I know Butch Hartman really wants to bring back Danny Phantom. Like, he's been pretty vocal and active on like YouTube and Twitter and social media in general. And he's like, I work with Frederator.
So do I.
They that's cool. We're Frederator siblings.
Yay!
And how they're like I spoke to a contact, and he was saying like, yeah, like Butch is trying to reach out to people and trying to be more active, and it's like, it shows, because he's trying to I guess like do like those videos where it's like, what if Danny Phantom was drawn in this style, or what if like he did the recent Fairly Odd Parents like anime thing. And it's like, I think Butch gets it, or at least he's really close to getting it, with trying to take the old content that he created with us when we grew up, and how he's trying to now reconnect with the new generation, and that's a bit more internet savvy.
Oh, so, yeah, definitely. I think that, I think it's like, I think it's actually really awesome that the creators are able to draw these characters in unique ways, in which back then the only way you can do it was with fan art. And it's like, I imagine that the characters look like this when they're adults. I imagine that the characters look like this in their teenage years, if they're little kids. I imagine them looking like this with a particular costume or whatever. So It's nice to see, I've actually seen that in recent years. Like the original creator of Daria did her interpretation about what would the characters look like if they were adults and if they were living in, 2017. And I think that it's actually really cool to see creators doing that.
I agree, 100%. What a interesting time we live in, where like due to the advent of the internet and how it's truly just grown as big as it has, where you no longer really need a middleman to present your content as a fan. I mean, it's a lot more competition, but you don't need to go to an agent or go out to LA to be like, here, look at my drawings. It's like, no, you can post them on the internet, and you can have people like Butch be like, hey, I saw the picture you tagged me on Twitter. I love this. Let's talk more. Maybe we can work together. And I'm just saying that as a possible like scenario with any creator or any person who's a fan who uses the internet as a stepping stone to get their content out there. And we live in the Wild West days of the web, and cartoons, despite having a slow down period in the mid 2000s, in my opinion, I think they're starting to bounce back. They're just trying to find out exactly how do we go about doing it from this point on. So we'll see what happens. It should be an interesting show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that because of the internet, it's able to give the audience an opportunity to say, we like this, we want to see more. Like back then, TV companies would only rely on the ratings for that. If your ratings suck, then you can kiss the show goodbye.
I agree. I mean, because you see things like Bravest Warriors and Be a Puppy Cat, where I remember in like the 2010s or whenever they came out, like 2011 or 12, where it's like people were excited to watch those shows, and then there was that dilemma where it's like, because it's just the truth, and I know people get upset about it, but it's like, how do we monetize it? Because it's easier to monetize on TV. But TV is starting to lose its audience, and it's becoming a bit more expensive to do a show on television. And then online, there's a challenge of like, well, how do we get paid? Because Bee and Puppy Cat, and I believe Bravest Warriors, now you can either pay for a subscription service for like I forget the name of the service, and watch it there. Like, I mean, I bring this up to say, we still have that question of how can cartoons online make money and be efficient and pay the people who make it. And I think we're close to solving that, but definitely some changes probably going to be in the near future to really solidify a platform where people can make cartoons online and present it. Because on YouTube right now, you're not getting enough money for the time you put into it. That's why animation on YouTube is like really detailed animations is practically dead, or is a shadow of its former self, because people can't survive off that kind of budget.
Which is a shame, because it used to be back then in which if you were dedicated to creating your own cartoon online, then you could just do it. But now it's even a struggle to do that.
Yeah. I remember when YouTube changed the way they do their algorithms and how they pay. Because I remember YouTube started off as more like, wow, here's content, like that's good enough, like someone skateboarding, or there's an elephant at the zoo waving its trunk. And then it went from that to being like really popular sketch comedy with things like Smosh and Niga Higa. And then it moved from that to being animation, because Newgrounds people started to move over, like Egoraptor and his pals, and the Newgrounds people moved over to YouTube and started doing like cartoons on there, which were like super popular, because you're watching a cartoon on YouTube. It's awesome. Like that's sweet. You can go, I can watch an Egoraptor like Metal Gear cartoon. They were a lot of fun. But then YouTube was like, wait a second, we're starting to understand that this new brand's coming, this new form of content called Let's Plays are coming in. And it's long form content. And you can monetize that. You can put more commercials and ads into those videos. And then they said, okay, so we no longer pay you by the views you get, but by how long people watch your video. So the longer the video, the more you get paid. And then after that, animators are basically screwed on YouTube. And it's been like that ever since.
It's a real shame that people who put in work to do research and for doing editing and presenting, that they're not getting the payment that they deserve, especially for those who have spent weeks or months doing a project, and it's just pretty much is all for naught. So it's very difficult, and I'm hoping that someday it gets fixed up. But going back into our topic of Nickelodeon now,
yes.
I'm really happy that it's becoming what it is, and I'm hoping that they still stay on the same boat, because I think where they're going, I think it's really commendable that they're able to listen to their fans, and that they're able to respond to them saying, we know what you like, we're going to do the best that we can to give it to you. And sure, there have been some screw-ups along the way. I mean, we can't expect everything to be perfect, but trust me, it's a lot better now than it was 10 years ago, that they ignore the fan base, or they try to delete the comments because, we don't think that you are right. What we're doing is funny. Remember that whole Nick Studio 10 fiasco?
Oh Lord.
Yeah, we've passed that now. I think that we're in a much better time.
Yes, we are. And the internet's a big place for these producers to. I think there's that little line where TV world might have a little bit of an ego, and they're not entirely sure how to incorporate like the internet and people's comments on it, or even the content they might submit. But it's getting better, and I think they're doing a better job putting their ear to the ground and listening to the fans, like you said, and hearing what they want to see. And in result, we get things like Harvey Beaks and Loud House and we'll see what direction it continues to go. It's going to be interesting. I feel like the next, like, this might be a bit of a stretch of a time gap, but the next 10 years, I think, will be a make it or break it point for a lot of TV channels and how they're going to adapt, because media is changing, the entertainment's changing, and all these new generations coming in. I mean, their primary entertainment device is will be a phone or an iPad or a computer, and it's up to Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network to go, okay, we can keep making the content we make, but we got to be able to adapt to how we stream it online and get that content to our audiences still, and transfer over our audience from being a TV audience to an internet audience. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll definitely see what happens. All right, well, that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for listening, and Saberspark, thank you so much for coming on by. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so let the people know where they can find you at.
You can find me on Twitter at Saberspark on Twitter. You can find me on YouTube. I try to put a video out per week. Sometimes it's been hectic this time of the year, but you can find me on Saberspark at YouTube. And you can find me on Facebook as well at Saberspark. So hit up any of those 3 platforms and I will be there.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. So tune in next time, as we're going to be having ourselves another guest discussing about Nickelodeon. Hope to see you around soon, and thank you for listening.
Nickelodeon.